In the history of baseball, there's been nobody like Bob Uecker. He once led the league in pass balls, as a backup catcher. Over 6 years as an MLB player, Uecker hit under 200 at the plate. Gaylord Perry said the day Uecker hit a home run against him was the worst day of his life. Bob's nickname, Mr. Baseball, was given to him as a joke, and he was once choked on live television by Andre the Giant. And yet, for the last 50 years, Bob Uecker has been one of the most beloved personalities in baseball. He's been the radio voice of the Brewers since the 1970s, despite never having signed a contract with the team. He's appeared on The Tonight Show over 100 times. He had his own TV show, appeared in movies, and he even once hosted Saturday Night Live. But wait, who is Bob Uecker, and what makes him so special? The answer lies, as you might have guessed, in Milwaukee. Bob Uecker was one of 3 children to Mary and Gus, a Swiss die maker by trade. Nobody would have guessed that young Bob would grow up to become the greatest ball player in the history of Wisconsin sports. Now, that could be because he didn't, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Bob loved baseball growing up. He spent lots of free time at Milwaukee's Borchert Field, home of the local minor league team, the Brewers. Uecker never finished high school, enlisting in the Army at the age of 20. Now, Bob didn't want to be sent overseas. Those of you familiar with the US military might recognize this as a problem. Uecker wasn't worried, though. He had a plan. See, soldiers who'd played baseball in college were allowed to join the military league. As a catcher, this seemed like the perfect chance for Bob to avoid getting shipped out of the country. The only thing standing in his way, however, was that he had never been to college. So he improvised. He told the Army that he had played baseball at Marquette University. In reality, Uecker had never gone to Marquette. On top of that, Marquette didn't even have a baseball team. Luckily, the Army never bothered to check either of those things, and Bob was allowed to play. He signed with his hometown Milwaukee Braves in 1956.
I signed a very modest $3,000 bonus with the Braves in Milwaukee, which I'm sure a lot of you know, and my old man didn't have that kind of money to put out. But the Braves took it.
He finally made his major league debut against the Dodgers in 1962, entering the game as a pinch hitter against Hall of Fame pitcher Don Drysdale. He grounded out. He made his hometown debut a few weeks later as the starting catcher versus the Giants. Facing Juan Marichal, another future Hall of Famer, Uecker went 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts. He did, however, manage a walk. Now, Bob did have a few highlights at the plate throughout his career. Notably, of the 14 home runs he ever hit in MLB, 3 of them came off of Hall of Famers, Gaylord Perry, Fergie Jenkins, and Sandy Koufax. The Braves traded Bob to the Cardinals in 1964. He spent 2 seasons in St. Louis as the backup catcher for Tim McCarver. He had a batting average of just .198, but Bob's teammates praised him for keeping them loose for their World Series run. Uecker could be friends with just about anyone. This included his teammate and fellow Bob Gibson. If you need proof, look no further than this photo. This is the official team picture for the 1964 St. Louis Cardinals. Here in the back row is Bob Uecker, and here in the row in front of him is Bob Gibson. Now, you might be wondering what's so special about this photograph, and the answer is nothing. Kind of. See, there's a reason Bob and Bob had to be separated for this photo shoot, and that's because this isn't the first team photo the Cardinals took this year. That would be this.
This is a team picture that once a year they have these team picture days is what they are, and they had proofed it and everything, and then brought it back to the ballpark before they finally caught that scene there.
What, can you come in a little closer on that?
Well, Bob and I are holding hands.
Bob Gibson was also once asked about this photo. I'd like to say it was a symbol of racial unity we achieved on the Cardinals, or that it represented the connection between pitcher and catcher. Nah, the fact is, we were just goofballs. Of course, you already knew that about Uecker. Unsurprisingly, Bob, Uecker that is, was traded to the Phillies after the '65 season. If you want an idea of how Uecker's time in Philadelphia went, just know that he was once fined by a police officer for being drunk in public, which also happens to be Philly's most popular hobby. He was then traded back to the Braves, who were now in Atlanta. Like before, Bob mainly served as the backup catcher in 1967, playing just 76 games. This didn't stop him from tallying 27 passed balls that season, leading the National League. It was the only time Uecker led the league in anything. During spring training of 1968, Bob was involved in a fight at a nightclub in Florida. At the Cock and Bull restaurant in West Palm Beach, Uecker was struck over the head with a beer bottle. He needed 48 stitches to close the wound. less than 2 weeks later, he was released. A few years after that, Bob would become the official spokesperson for Miller Lite.
You know, one of the best things about being an ex-big leaguer is getting freebies to the game. Call the front office, bingo. And once these fans recognize me, I probably won't even have to pay for my light beer from Miller. Down it, I love them. These fans know I drink light because it's less filling and it tastes great. Good seats, huh?
You're in the wrong seat, buddy. Come on.
Oh, I must be in the front row.
Come on.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer, and less.
Good seats, hey, buddy? He missed the tag! He missed the tag!
For now, though, for the first time in years, Bob Uecker had no plan. He was also unemployed. So he got to work. Bob started doing stand-up, quickly turning it into a role as PR ambassador for the Braves. His career really took off, though, when he was asked to open for comedian Don Rickles at a nightclub owned by musician Al Hirt. Hirt took a liking to Uecker and introduced him to his friend, Johnny Carson.
We thought we'd invite Bob to kind of reminisce about some of the great World Series games he's enjoyed watching from the grandstands, like a lot of us. Would you welcome Bob Uecker?
By the time Carson retired in 1992, Bob Uecker had appeared on The Tonight Show roughly 100 times. Bob loved late night, especially since Carson allowed him to do pretty much whatever he wanted on his show, for an audience of millions. Despite his newfound celebrity, however, Bob never lost his love for baseball. And baseball, as it turned out, wasn't done with Uecker either. The year was 1970. The Brewers were in their inaugural season after the bankrupt Seattle Pilots were sold to Bud Selig. Selig, a Milwaukee native himself, asked Bob to be the team's official radio voice. Now, this wasn't Uecker's first role with the Brewers. Before he was their announcer, Milwaukee had hired him as a scout. As Selig recalled, Uecker was, quote, "the worst scout I ever had. We sent him up to the Northern League, and the next thing I know, Frank Lane comes raging into my office, asking what kind of scout I hired. The report was smeared with gravy and mashed potatoes." On September 4th, 1971, the Brewers announced that Uecker, no longer a scout, would broadcast games on TV and radio. Uecker had agreed to this arrangement on one condition. It had to be a handshake deal, with no contract involved. For the next 50 years, that's how every agreement between Bob Uecker and the Brewers went down. For as quickly as Uecker skyrocketed to fame on television, his announcing abilities developed more gradually. Former Milwaukee broadcaster Tom Collins remembered some of Uecker's early struggles. Bob's problem then was in finding stuff to ad-lib. He'd constantly repeat the count and the score, and swing his legs like a pendulum, and smoke cigarette after cigarette. Over time, though, Bob Uecker grew into one of the most respected sportscasters in the game. One reason for this was that, unlike some broadcasters, Uecker refused to speak poorly about a player on the air, explaining that he knew how hard the game was to play. He went national in the mid-70s, teaming up with TV legends like Howard Cosell for Monday Night Baseball on ABC.
Uecker and Cosell and I are doing a game in, I think it was Houston. And Cosell says on the air, he says, "Okay, Uecker, you know, you don't have to be so truculent. You do know what truculent means, don't you?" And without hesitating, Uecker says, "Of course, Howard, if you had a truck and I borrowed it, it would be a truculent."
Bob was invited to host Saturday Night Live in 1984, a season that featured one-off cast members like Martin Short, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Billy Crystal.
It wasn't my fault, Dad. The ball took a bad bounce.
Yeah, how many times have I told you, the ball takes a bad hop on you, you take it in the face, huh?
In 1985, he landed his first major acting role in the ABC sitcom Mr. Belvedere.
And Bob Uecker, had already was on a successful stand-up show called Mr. Belvedere, which starred Christopher Hewitt, who studied at the Oxford Academy, as Mr. Belvedere, the butler to Bob Uecker's character. And he said to me, he goes, "Hey man, you know Belvedere?" He goes, "I'll tell you something about Belvedere you might not know." I go, "What's that?" He goes, "He loves fried mozzarella." I go, "Oh, how do you know that?" He goes, "Well, in the back of these TV shows, they have little things where you can get food, and they have a little stove, you know, with a skillet. And man, I'd put mozzarella on there, and I'd feed it to him. And then one time I got called into a big meeting, and all these muckety-mucks were sitting around. They said, "You got to stop feeding Belvedere." And I said, "Man, he likes it."
In 1987, Bob made maybe the most bizarre TV appearance of his career as the ring announcer for WrestleMania 3. The fans must have liked him too, since he returned for WrestleMania 4 in 1989, when the movie Major League was released.
Just a bit outside. He tried the corner and missed.
The Major League series cemented Uecker as a household name, introducing him to an entirely new generation of baseball fans. By the mid-90s, though, Uecker had become so successful that he had actually considered leaving broadcasting altogether to pursue acting. In the end, Bob decided to stay in Milwaukee. In 2001, he was inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame. Then, in 2003, Bob won the Ford C. Frick Award, the most prestigious achievement possible for a baseball journalist. When it came time for his speech in Cooperstown, he delivered it in classic Uecker fashion.
I remember Gene Mock doing things to me at Philadelphia. I'd be sitting there and he'd say, grab a bat and stop this rally.
In 2010, Bob received my favorite honor of his, a spot in the WWE Hall of Fame. Uecker took a cut to his workload in 2014 due to health issues. That hasn't stopped him from calling Brewers games every season since then, including this one. When he kicked off his 54th year as a broadcaster this April, he was showered with love by the Milwaukee crowd.
One of a kind, isn't he?
He hasn't lost a step behind the mic either. Bob Uecker has two statues at the Brewers Stadium. The first is this one, a larger-than-life monument installed directly outside of Miller Park, now American Family Field, back in 2012. The second tribute to Bob is a little less obvious. The next time you go to a Brewers home game, take a look up behind home plate. There, you will find section 422, home to the worst view in maybe any MLB ballpark. They have been dubbed, lovingly of course, the Uecker seats. It's up here, in all his glory, that you'll find Bob Uecker with a permanent seat in the front row.